Recording. All right. Welcome back, everyone. This is our chance to talk with one another, to question each other, stump the chumps, stump one another, share. Everything's on the table.
Jake, let me just put in a plug for you someday to consider giving a gift to the PCC community and perhaps to yourself as well, by doing a course devoted to Barfield.
Love to do that sometime.
You know, it could even be like a 1 or 2 unit course, you know, really enter deeply into, because I have a feeling that everyone would be illuminated and you would probably feel elevated by it, as well as a kind of, in the same way that you were talking about loving to do your work, you know, that would be perhaps very close to the heart of it.
There was supposed to be one this summer in the Transformative Studies program on Barfield and the Imagination, and it was listed in the course catalog prior to registration, but now it's unfortunately gone. I'll have to look up the professor that was going to be teaching that. I think he was an adjunct faculty member, but it was supposed to happen.
I'm going to bet that it's a consequence of another victim of the incredible disruption in the last few months. Yeah, I was actually on, just as a quick aside, last Friday, I was up at like 4 a.m. to join a Barfield conference that was happening at Cambridge. So there's which was really exciting. So it's the first time I've seen a Barfield conference hosted in such a big environment. Now, granted, it was all online because everything's been forced online, but there's some really great work being done on it.
Who were the major players?
Well, from Cambridge, Douglas Headley and Malcolm Geet. Malcolm's a fantastic poet and Coleridge scholar that some of you know his work, I think. Douglas Headley is a scholar of Cambridge Platonism and Romanticism, and was one of my advisors there. But Mark Vernon was also present.
Mark was, okay.
Yeah, and then I was there, and a woman whose name I'm forgetting right now. She's a wonderful Russian who writes on Arthurian themes, you know, in Barfield. But I always have trouble remembering her name. Anyway.
Well, do consider, I'm sure any course on Barfield would be an enrichment, but for you to teach it, Jake, would be a very special thing indeed.
Take it to heart. Appreciate the suggestion. That would be certainly super fun, and to read Barfield with y'all would be great.
I'll sign up.
So what should we talk about? I see Karin's got a hand up. Anyone else have hands? Oh, I see Joseph has a hand up. Ashton has a hand. Chad has a hand. All right, so let's start with Chad, since I'm going to just start calling on people who haven't spoken as much in the previous weeks, and then we'll keep going. All right.
It's pretty simple. Page 512, I just have a problem with this one sentence, and I'm going to read the 2 sentences, one before and after. It says, "This is a major gap. It is not just the epiphanic art of the last 2 centuries which fails to get its due by this dismissal. We are now in an age in which a publicly accessible cosmic order of meanings is an impossibility. The only way we can explore the order in which we are set with an aim to defining moral sources is through this part of personal resonance." So first of all, I just, the one sentence, we are now in an age in which publicly accessible cosmic order of meanings is an impossibility. I particularly have a problem with that because I misspoke 2 weeks ago when I was pointing to the astrological dimension of reality, and I said that it was pointing toward constitutive goods. It was part of what I was reading. What I meant to say was that it points to the ontic logos.
Sure. Yeah.
And it actually reveals that in a sense that is objectively real from a third person perspective, that we all have the capacity to know where the planets are in relationship. And then what it seems to be revealing is the archetypal substructure or underlying structure of our experience. Not just out there, but interior. And that's what the last part of the sentence he's saying, you know, getting to the moral sources through personal resonance. And it's both our personal resonance and our capacity to describe and articulate them together, as well as connecting to ultimately nature. You know, it's the romantic expressivist term towards nature. The planets are nature. It's not separate. It's part of our environment. It's just extended.
That sentence, by the way, happens to be the very first sentence that when I picked up Taylor's Sources of the Self in a bookstore back in the 30 years ago or whenever it was, that was the first sentence that jumped out at me. And I then noticed that when Jake chose, am I remembering correctly, Jake, that when you chose 2 sentences for the epigraph of the course, that was one of them? I think it was.
It might have been. I'd have to pull it up again to look.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I put that together.
I think it was at the top of the syllabus. I think it was one of the 2. And anyway, it's like, yeah, I kind of started with that point early in the very first class to just point out, even though I think many of us here in PCC are working with more moral sources and in a sense, perhaps a larger and more complex ontology and certainly cosmology than Taylor is working with in this book. But the fact of the matter is that it's his premise that because a publicly accessible cosmic order of meanings is not possible in our age, that premise obliges him to put a very high value on exploring possible moral sources through personal resonance, through epiphanic art, as we all did and we all do when we attend so carefully to the poetry and the music and the works of art that seem to us to be carrying something of deep significance for us, and he also it both obliges him to pay attention to how our moral sources have evolved from the romantic vision, for example, to the modernist and then the epiphanic art and so forth, but it also allows him to put high value on this, and in a way that all these other theorists who he looks at, like Weber and Habermas, Adorno, the critical theorists, are not able to do, because even though they may have a place as part of their kind of differentiated grid, yes, there's a place for expressivism and for creative self-fulfillment, but that doesn't give us access to moral sources. And so it's a subjectivist view of expressivism and of the role of the creative imagination. So Taylor, therefore, is rightly elevating epiphanic art and helping us all to see how, I mean, even you or I, or those of others of us who have entered into the moral source of an archetypal cosmos, have done that through personal resonance, and that just opened up into an empirical, kind of universe of evidence and compelling insights and so forth. So that's why I value so much what he did. Nobody's going to know just what we know, just as we don't know what they know. And I guess Taylor's, even though we may disagree with that sentence, that sentence is still valid for the vast majority of the academic intelligentsia, for example, who are kind of a priesthood of our culture that we need to kind of be in dialogue with.
I think I'll only say 2 sentences in response. The epigraph I used included that first part that Chad quoted, but it then used an ellipsis to jump down to the end of the paragraph, which I think is, because apart from what he says in the end of the paragraph, it would be pretty frustrating. So what he goes on to say, so the only way we can explore the order, this is in what Chad quoted to us, the only way we can explore the order in which we are set is an aim to defining moral sources is through this part of personal resonance. This is true not only of epiphanic art, but of other efforts in philosophy, in criticism, which attempt the same search. And then the last sentence, he says, we delude ourselves if we think that philosophical or critical language for these matters is somehow more hard-edged and more free from personal index than that of poets or novelists. The subject doesn't permit language which escapes personal resonance. And I think that changes the valence of the statement. So it's not just about saying that meaning is engaged in these sort of woolly searches for these woolly searches for meaning and this kind of frivolous, personal, subjectivist, blah, blah, blah. Instead, he's saying, actually, this is constitutive of all of our discussion of these crucial aspects of our lives. And what Taylor doesn't acknowledge, but where Chad, I think, is rightly pushing him, is the extent to which that involves not just personal resonance and exploration within, but also personal resonance in dialogue with a world that exists publicly outside of ourselves, and that those two produce a very different vision than one alone, right?
A natural world and a cosmic world outside of us that we're in dialogue with. Yeah, he gestures towards the idea that there could be a dialogue with that world through Rilke. Rilke serves as this kind of paradigm figure for making that relationship to a world that is speaking to us and not just us speaking to it or making, So I think Rilke and Dostoevsky kind of serve as his kind of pole stars in this book for his kind of paradigm figures that represent places where he feels personal resonance.
Yeah, he could have, to be honest, he could have learned a lot more from Dostoevsky about these things too, and from Dostoevsky's sources. The Russian sociologists that Dostoevsky was drawing on, especially Vladimir Solovyov, take this in very richly sort of PCC-ish territory. But anyway, so I'm going to ask Ashton to go next, and then we've got Karin and Joseph on deck. Can I unmute you? There you go.
Cool, thank you. So I just wondered if you, Jake and Rick, would mind just elaborating this sentence or this term, or this phrase that Taylor uses on page 515. It's the very top sentence, and he says, develop, he's inciting us to develop anthropologies of situated freedom. And, I think we've talked about that today, but I'm just curious how you all would describe that, and if anybody else has anything to contribute to.
I loved it when he said that. But Jake, you go first, and then I can add.
So post-liberal critiques of liberal political philosophy have become more and more prominent over the last 30 years. And the great danger with them is that they might give aid to anti-liberal moral approaches, which is not what Taylor wants, but sometimes they do. I mean, to be honest, forms of some of the rhetoric of Trumpism and the new rhetoric of nationalism and things like that can fit into post-liberal critiques. What Taylor is calling for is an articulation of post-liberalism that rejects the false atomized picture of individuals, but develops an alternative positive account of what freedom and emancipation looks like when we conceive ourselves as fundamentally relational and always constituted by communities apart from which we have some we have a dignity that stands apart from our immersion in the community, but we're always constituted in these embedded or situated relationships, right? So that's what he's calling for, is the need for that positive articulation, so that you don't allow your proper criticism of atomized individual modern liberalism to give shelter to regressive and oppressive political arrangements. That's what I took it to mean.
Yeah, and what I'd add is just I think we have been striving very much in our community to develop anthropologies of situated freedom. We use sometimes different language, but we are trying to discern a human being, the nature of human being, as simultaneously capable of autonomy, autonomous kind of creative, rational, moral, expressive agency within the world, and embedded, that we embodied in our bodies, but embedded in our communities, embedded in our history, embedded in our deep psyche, embedded in the cosmos, in the ensouled cosmos, and so forth. And it's that, what was that?
The earth.
The earth, exactly. To be simultaneously able to hold that, you know, it's a great conjunctio oppositorum. You know, it's of the solar individual freedom of self-manifestation, that single light in the sky, and it's also the lunar kind of great matrix of all being, in which everything's related, and in which we're embedded, and we draw our sustenance from, and we are born out of, and so forth, and we will die into it, and give our individual essence into the whole again. That's anthropologies of situated freedom is, in a way, exactly what, I mean, I hear pretty much every PCC faculty member in different ways trying to describe something like that, like Brian with his, you know, let's ground ourselves in this cosmogenesis, and part of cosmogenesis of the whole is our individuating and our being the cosmos in our form in the most individual way. And of course, that's exactly Jung's point with his notion of individuation that's grounded in the deep archetypal psyche and expresses the cosmic whole, at the same time is flowering, but flowering in that situated, embedded way out of the earth, and not out of the separate potted plant of that Jake was kind of warning against. That wasn't meant to be a mic drop.
Oh man, I put up a Teilhard quote, but my autocorrect changed his name to Reinhard. So, Karin.
Yeah, there's just so frigging much here. I'm definitely grieving the end of this class, and I can't help but feel like we should have had the class, and then after it, another hour of like workshopping and actually learning how to articulate our own. I mean, it's not only is there so much to talk about in this material, but to me, it feels like there's a practice embedded in it that that Taylor's kind of calling for us to learn how to articulate ourselves. So I'm feeling, you know, a lot. And in fact, actually, when you were talking earlier, Jake, about, you know, the love of, you know, we have to be moved by our love in some ways, or how much energy that taps into. In some ways, Taylor's, you know, kind of throwing out this invitation to us, like, how much do you love the idea of promoting forums for the generosity of dialogue? Like, because we so deeply need that in our world today. And, you know, Jake, you're sort of, I've seen you kind of embody that through the course of the class, and it's such an important part of the PCC culture. And at the same time, you know, I gave an example of just, I'm not going to get into the details, we don't have time, but just in Mendocino County, there's a polarization between kind of more Trumpian folks who want to just open up the businesses here and those who want to go slow and be responsible. And in a very real way, the dialogue that Taylor's talking about, the love for that dialogue, for that articulation and empathy and non-polarizing, that doesn't exist in our culture today in a very dire way. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to throw out that challenge, you know, to bring Taylor into the real world. And, you know, I have some other reflections, but this whole other thing that you've said, Jake, about how do we, you know, how we had this protagonist that came out of the Enlightenment that was an individual, and you've repeatedly referred to the mother, that we all start as a child with a mother. And we partly talk about this with the situatedness, but there's been a question for me throughout about, you know, what happens when the protagonist actually becomes relationship. And has Taylor really talked about that enough in here? But that's a separate thing. The bigger thing is about the generosity of dialogue.
And the practice.
Yeah, the practice.
I wonder if we can bring in Adam, who thinks a lot about practice, and may have some thoughts, and I'd love to hear them if you're there, Adam.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that throughout the whole course. I was trying to pull up the he has some Charles Taylor does. He has a talk that he gave at UC Berkeley that I've been looking forward to listening to. That we've mentioned it a little bit. This relationship he has with Thomas Mann and his contemplative practice, and I think a lot of what's presupposed that I wish that he brought into the foreground in this text is how it is that he's kind of able to see all of these sort of subtle patternings of subjects and identities, and what draws them forward, and what are the light sides and the shadow sides of that whole dynamic. Like, how does he do that? You know, it's one thing to be very good at reading a lot of books and synthesizing them, which clearly he's good at, but that's not really what's going on here, I don't think. This is a person who's actually kind of living into these perspectives and in some sense experiencing them. And I think that's where his practice comes in. And you know, one thing that I'm deeply interested in is could you put that into words? Could you put how that practice works into words so that somebody else can kind of go through it? And just the other thing that I think that gives him is, which is what came up in our group discussion today, was he clearly has his own sort of metaphysics, his own ontology, his own, I mean, he even mentions it towards the end, you know, his own relationship to Christian spirituality and religion. And that probably also gives him some access to some of these moves that he's able to make. But he's also able to kind of leave his own apparatus sort of, I don't want to say he leaves it behind, but he doesn't demand that you pick it up, and he doesn't seem possessed by it at all. Like he can see that he has a perspective, and it's not that he doesn't have this kind of what's the word I'm looking for? He's not proselytizing or trying to sell you on his own thing. He's just showing you the moves that it lets him make. And what he's actually set up, I think, is a very ingenious, it's a kind of an argument about the role moral sources play in your life. And for him, he hints that he hints and sometimes just says he believes in this kind of moral or metaphysical realism that has a kind of a Platonic quality to it. But everything that he says about the way moral sources guide behavior work completely in the absence of a commitment to that kind of metaphysics. You don't have to believe it at all to see that you are being guided by these moral sources. And I think there's a kind of maturity to that I don't think you would get without some real practice. And that's what makes it different from here's like a great synthesis of all of these rich historical periods, and look at all my references and how I've memorized them. It's actually this, that he moves in between them in a way that you don't get from just reading. And that's the practice element, and that Jake keeps talking about this moral phenomenology, and you get that it's transparent for many of us, but in a way he sees it. He can put it in front of himself and look at it, and that's the practice.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. I mean, he embodies. I think we talked about it at the very first class. He walks his talk. I do think his not putting his practice straight in front of us as the main foreground, or as foreground, actually, given the intervention that Sources of the Self was meant to be and has turned out to be, there's something to be said for remaining invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Flaubert said a novelist, an author of a novel, should be like God, present everywhere and invisible and visible nowhere. And that I like that kind of humility and invisibility on his part, where he really, the only time he brings up himself is pretty much in the most modest way of kind of pointing out something that he might be able to do better or whatever. But anyway, Jake may know of another, like that essay on John Main, I think could be a place to start in terms of his own practice.
Yeah, he doesn't talk. I don't know very many other places where he talks about it much. There's a couple YouTube videos floating around where he references things a little bit that were captured at various talks that he gave. But it's it's not been brought to articulation as fully as other things have in this text.
He's from a generation where you just, I don't know, you just keep those things private, to some extent, and you let the it's like the great artists who you don't show all your moves, like how you did that,
Right.
You just bring the work of art out there and anyway.
At the same time, he's asking us to take risks, so I I would have wanted a bit more risk as well. Anyway, yeah.
High standards. That was a pretty risky book, coming out of Cambridge, coming out of Oxford and Anglo-American philosophy.
It's true.
So I know that others have things that they want to talk about, but that we've run out of time, and we do have to let go of the Zoom channel so that the next class can have it. If you've got questions or comments that you wanted to bring and weren't able to bring them today, come and join us when we do the Zoom Hangout for the online folks, and for any of you who want to join, we can keep talking about Charles Taylor, Sources of the Self, and the kind of issues that it raises for us outside of just thinking about the text, thinking about these broader questions. I really appreciate, I just want to say I really, really appreciated the chance to think through these things with y'all, to read with you, to do this with Rick has just been an absolute joy and privilege. You know, anyway, it's been a treat. Despite the crazy circumstances of this semester, this has meant a lot to me. So I'm a little sad to see it come to an end, but I'm happy that I get to see y'all online, if not in person at various points. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Jake, for it's just been a great privilege to learn from you and teach with you, and God, it's just been a very, very special course, a challenging course. I mean, just keeping up with the readings and the you know, to really keep up with it and think it through and then be preparing the lectures. I can't remember a course that was quite as consuming, but as you said about your experience of parenting and of studying what you love, the fact of the matter is I didn't find any of it work. It was just, it comes as easy, just as I remember raising my children, that never seemed hard, you know, it just, it comes kind of effortlessly in a certain way if you're, the love is sort of moving you, and certainly in this context that the love was dominant for what we were doing. I was going to end, I don't know, is it too late, Jake? But I was going to end with this short poem. This is a poem that in many ways represents almost the entire narrative journey that Taylor has taken us on. And it comes out of the 20th century, and so therefore out of the kind of modernist poetic milieu. And yet it harkens, as you listen to it, you'll be able to hear the almost every theme sounded going back to ancient Greece and Christianity and Romanticism and the Enlightenment, right up to our own time. And this is a poem called Incantation by Czesław Miłosz, the great Polish poet, and Robert Pinsky, who translated this poem with Czesław Miłosz while they were both in Berkeley. Robert Pinsky was at the time was the poet laureate of the United States. He describes like how courageous it was to be like Czesław Miłosz in Poland while the Nazis and the communists were, and then the communists were, it was like a courageous, heroic thing just to have a scrap of paper with a poem on it, and in defiance of what was around one. So this is called Incantation. Miłosz is spelled M-I-L-O-S-Z. It's Polish, you know, Czesław, same unusual. I'll put it up on the board, up here right when I'm finished. So, human reason is beautiful and invincible. No bars, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes the universal ideas in language and guides our hand, so we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. It puts what should be above things as they are. It is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It does not know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage. It saves austere and transparent phrases from the filthy discord of tortured words. It says that everything is new under the sun, opens the congealed fist of the past. Beautiful and very young are philosophia and poetry, her ally in the service of the good. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their friendship will be glorious. Their time has no limit. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. That's the end. Beautiful and very young are philosophia and poetry, her ally in the service of the good. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their friendship will be glorious. Their time has no limit. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. That's coming straight out of the heart of darkness there in 20th century history, and seeing that. Anyway, I'll show you the what the poem looks like with the spelling of the poet's name. And there you can see incantation, and then here's Czesław Miłosz. Okay, well,
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Rick. It's lovely. It's perfect end. See y'all.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see y'all in person again someday.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for everything. Thank you.